Hi everyone, this is Jen, and in this solo discussion for the history and philosophy of mathematics education, I will be grappling with a question that focuses on the heart of this course. So, who truly controlled the standard of mathematical truth in the pre modern era? Hmm. At first glance, this seems like a straightforward historical question. But as our readings across Europe, the Americas, and East Asia, it shows that it has deep epistemological and political aspects. The answer of this question determines not just what knowledge survived, but what knowledge was allowed to be called mathematics in the first place. So, was it the institutions, the universities, the academies, or the imperial courts? Or was it the individuals, the self taught geniuses, the merchants, the traveling scholars? Or was it more complicated, a constant negotiation between the two, institution and self taught? Over the next few minutes, I'm going to weave together these three distinct regional histories, paying close attention to the individual journeys that illuminate this tension. And by the end, perhaps I'll offer a defensible answer to that central question. So, in the first part, let us talk about the institutional claim that structure is necessary. So let's begin with the case for institutions. So if you read the European history from a certain angle, you see that there is a clear progressivist narrative. The Jesuit Ratio Studiorum of 1599 provided a uniform curriculum from Poland to Peru. The Prussian Arbiter exam of 1788 made mathematics a formal requirement for an educated citizen. The philosophical faculties in Protestant Germany created stable professorships for mathematics. The argument here is that institutions were epistemically necessary. They created the scaffolding for cumulative knowledge. They ensure that a standardized version of Euclid's elements was taught across continents. They provided the positions like the Hollis Professorship at Harvard, where a man like John Winthrop could spend 40 years teaching and researching. But even with this institutional narrative, we see individuals pushing back. Like Christopher Clavius was a Jesuit at the Colegio Romano who tried to reform the Ratio Studiorum from within, seeking to elevate mathematics status. Though his grand vision was largely rejected in the final 1599 version, his authoritative edition of Euclid shaped the minimal mathematics that was taught. He was a product of the system who tried to reshape it. While Philip Melanchthon, the preceptor Germaniae, used his position within the new Protestant university system to design this Schulordnungen that structured learning for generations. His independent engagement with mathematics led him to promote it within those very structures. So even here, the story isn't simply institutions controlled truth. It's individuals within institutions fought to define what truth would be. So in the second part, let's discuss the counterclaim, wherein it says individuals and the periphery. Now let's consider the counter narrative from the Americas. The ciphering book tradition in North America shows us a parallel world of mathematical learning, practical vocational entirely outside the curriculum of Harvard or Yale. Boys mastered the rule of three and compound interest, not to pass an exam, but to succeed in commerce. The colleges ignored this knowledge, and yet individuals emerge from both inside and outside institutions. John Winthrop at Harvard pursued independent research on sunspots and transits, earning recognition from the Royal Society. He was both a product and a shaper of institutional structure. In Latin America, Carlos de Siguenza y Gorgora flourished within the rigid structures of the colonial university in Mexico, engaging in cutting edge astronomical work and being named Royal Cosmographer. The periphery could produce knowledge recognized by the metropole. On the other hand, Jose Celestino Mutis brought Enlightenment ideas from Spain to New Granada, founding an observatory and pushing the curriculum beyond its traditional limits. So his independent intellectual drive reformed the structured learning of others. So the counterclaim isn't that institutions were irrelevant. It's that they were not the sole arbiters. Individuals on the margins, geography, geographically, socially, institutionally, could and did produce knowledge that challenged or expanded the canon. While in East Asia complicates the picture even further. Here, we see different kinds of institutional structure. First, the master disciple lineage. Second, the competitive school. Third, the commercial publishing house. So in China, the Kangxi emperor received highly structured learning from the Jesuit tutors, but his own independent intellectual curiosity and his authority as emperor allowed him to shape the curriculum. He rejected symbolic algebra because he didn't understand it. His personal engagement structured the mathematical education of the entire Imperial Academy. Meanwhile, Li Shanlan was a self-taught autodidact who mastered Chinese mathematical classics on his own. Later, he worked within the structured environment of Interpreters College, where he became a translator and teacher, bridging Chinese and Western mathematics. His independent path made him uniquely qualified to synthesize two traditions. In Japan, Mitsuyoshi sensitized commercial knowledge and Chinese texts into Jinkuki, a textbook that would structure the learning of countless others for over 2 centuries. He moved from being a product of commercial intellectual environment to its most influential shaper. On the other hand, Seki Takakazu studied important Chinese classics, structuring learning, but then independently developed a more symbolic algebra called Tenzanjutsu. His work then became the structured curriculum for the Seki school, passed down through graded degrees to future generations. He was both an independent innovator and the founder of a new orthodox lineage. And Ida Yaswaki, self-taught in a remote village, sought recognition in the capital, but was humiliated by the established Seki school. His independent reaction was to find his own rival school, Saijoryu, creating a new structure to challenge the old. From our readings, it gives us two archetypal journeys from the Islamic world that perfectly frame this discussion. Ibn Sina began with structured learning, a house teacher guiding him through Euclid and Ptolemy. But his teacher's understanding was so mediocre. Ibn Sina undertook on his own to solve the entire remainder of the book of Euclid and worked out the geometric figures in the Almagest by himself. Even within a structured setting, his intellectual progress was driven by his own curiosity and ability. He became an autodidact in practice, using the text as his primary guide. On the other hand, Al-Khalasadi followed a different path. He began multiple he began with multiple teachers, reading established texts in his own town. Then he made an independent decision. He left his homeland and traveled for 15 years to study in Tlemcen, Tunis, and Cairo, seeking out renowned teachers. During his travels, he began writing his own treatises, transitioning from a consumer of knowledge to producer of knowledge. So both figures demonstrate that while a foundation of structured learning was essential, true intellectual development required the individual to go beyond it, whether by pushing the boundaries of text independently or by synthesizing knowledge from different traditions and creating new works. So, after all this, I return to the central question: who truly controlled the standard of mathematical truth in the pre modern era? Well, I guess my answer is this: control was never absolute. It was a dialectical process, a constant negotiation between institutional structures and individual agency. Institutions provided the scaffolding, the texts, books, chairs, curricula, and the chains of authority. They certified some knowledge as legitimate and rendered other knowledge invisible. The Incan quipu was not incorporated in the Spanish archive. It was ignored. The knowledge of women in the colonial America was not laundered. It was deemed irrelevant. So the institutional record is a record of power, not of epistemic merit. And yet, individuals consistently pushed against, reformed, and sometimes shattered these structures. Take, for example, Clavius. Clavius tried to reform the Jesuits from within. Seki transformed important knowledge into a new tradition. Ida rebelled against the orthodoxy and founded his own school. Ibn Sina surpassed his teacher and became an autodidact. Al-Kala Sadi traveled for 15 years, synthesizing traditions and creating new knowledge. These individuals who most influenced the standard of mathematical truth were those who first mastered the structured tradition and then transcended it. They were both products and producers. They operated within institutions, but they also used their agency to reshape those institutions or to build new ones. So the pre modern era did not have a single answer to who controlled mathematical truth. It had multiple competing answers. The one that survives in the archive is the one backed by the institutional power. But the one that drove intellectual progress was often the one forged individuals working within, against, and beyond those institutions. So, institutional structures such as schools, universities, and research centers um, are very important. These are educational systems that provide essential foundation for learning mathematics. These institutions offer organized curricula, qualified teachers, learning materials, and environment that encourage inquiry and problem solving. They create opportunities for students to encounter mathematical concepts, learn established theories, and develop fundamental skills. In this way, institutions act as framework that makes learning possible and accessible. However, intellectual progress cannot rely solely on institutions. True understanding and advancement in mathematics depend largely on the individual's learner's curiosity, persistence, creativity, and critical thinking. Mathematics requires active engagement, exploring of patterns, questioning and establishing assumptions, practicing problem solving, reflecting on these ideas. Even with excellent institutional support, meaningful progress occurs only when the individual students take initiative to think deeply and independently. In other words, institutions can provide the tools, the environment, the curriculum, the support, the guidance, but it is the individual who must use those tools to construct the knowledge that matters to them and push intellectual boundaries. As what history presented, many mathematical discoveries and insights have emerged from individuals who went beyond what institutions formally provided. We have mentioned some of those a while ago. They are driven by personal passion and determination. Therefore, while institutional structures lay the groundwork for mathematical education, research, and others, the growth of mathematical knowledge, prowess, and development ultimately depends on the effort, motivation, engagement, and creativity of the individual learner or thinker. So, my conclusion and my contemporary resonance, this matters today because we still live with this tension. When we design a standardized curriculum, we are building an institution. When we create an assessment instrument, we are encoding a standard truth. When we choose mathematical traditions to include in our textbooks, we are designing and deciding whose knowledge counts. The question for us educators and researchers is not whether to have institutions. It's whether our institutions leave room for the next Ibn Sina, the next Seki, or the next independent mind to emerge. It's whether we can design structures that provide the necessary foundation without foreclosing the possibility of transcendence. So that is a question with a pre-modern history and profoundly contemporary urgency. Thank you for listening.